Hey everybody, it's Alex. Hopefully this time works. I had a whole video more or less ready to go. Last night I got 7 minutes in and it just stopped recording, and I got a notification that there wasn't enough storage left in my phone to record. And so last night and today I kept deleting a bunch of stuff. I thought my gallery and everything backed up to OneDrive or Google. Apparently not, so I set that up. So hopefully I can actually film tonight. So I was going to say is, first of all, thank you so much to everybody who just supported me over the last several days, everybody who encouraged me to offer myself grace, which I'm sure that my therapist would agree with. It was a tough week, even though being out of town was nice. It still kind of threw off parts of the week just from being gone and then having to play catch up, and then but all of that was last week. This week, obviously situations are still happening. I'm looking for my necklace. Situations are still happening broadly that have me very concerned, very worried, which is something that I'm grateful. Oh, it's Jasper photobombing again. Oh, sillies. Here's Jasper. He wanted to be in the camera. You show off your Valentine sweater? Well, everybody should see your Valentine sweater. There we go. Finally got something that kind of fit him. I'm happy about that. But all the bandanas I was tied were too big, weren't they? Yeah. All right. So, as long as Jasper wants to hang out with me, he can join me. What was I? Oh, yeah, that was all last week. Things are happening broadly that have me concerned, have me worried. Thankfully, got that really good group chat, awesome ladies, and we've all been supporting each other, checking in with each other, sending each other encouragement. So that's been so nice. And then for my own life, I feel like, yes, there's still struggles and challenges. The year of the snake, winter, is not done with me yet. But I can see a light on the horizon and things starting to get better. I've had some great updates over the last couple days that were just really timely. So that's very helpful. So yeah, I obviously didn't get the video done by Saturday, Sunday, like I was planning to. But I still want to give you guys something, especially with how supportive you guys have been. So what I was going to do was originally was this last weekend's video was supposed to be a video on why the Vampire Chronicles exists. But then figure out the right tight for this thing with my glasses eventually. I don't know. Try without. I don't need to see you guys, right? I'm kidding. I only have my morning Adderall today. Vampire Chronicles, why it exists. Yes, that was going to be this last weekend's episode. But then I ended up covering that as part of my like series announcement, series intro video. So then I was like, what do I do? But then as I was going over that video and editing it to the extent that I'm able to do for free and have so far figured out, I realized I had more to say about why I like the Vampire Chronicles. And so I was going to do a whole essay once again to use as a script for that video. And I just couldn't focus on it between the things going on in my life and the news that I was getting. It was too much for me. And then I decided, well, if the script is the hang up, why make yourself try to write a script? So, in case you haven't noticed yet, I don't have a script this time. Didn't finish it. I do hope to finish it. That is something that is like on my mind of eventually I'm gonna finish writing this thing. But it hasn't been something that I could do so far. And I think right now I kind of just want to move forward with upcoming videos. So this video, unscripted, I still have like, you know, the headers and section headings and everything in my head of like the things that I want to talk about. But I don't have a script, which I have felt was necessary to try to keep me on track. And I don't have that. And I didn't take my afternoon Adderall. So, yeah. I'm going to do my best to stay on track without assistance. So, the Vampire Chronicles. Why I like it. I touched on a few things in my series intro video. The insight that the books give into Anne Rice's heart and mind, which I think is such a cool case because, you know, Interview with a Vampire was published in 1976, right? And then Blood Communion was published in, I believe, 2016. And so we have these books spanning those decades, really. And seeing how like her heart and mind kind of changed from one book to another. She was always in a state of figuring out her beliefs, and they were changing a lot, and just all the things that you can see book by book, because I am a believer that, you know, intentionally or not, we as writers, more specifically, but creators in general, we put pieces of ourselves, sometimes large, sometimes small, into our work. And there are things that you can kind of, I don't know if learn is the strongest, like, is too strong. There's things that you can infer, things you can assume. Maybe you ask an author or a creator question of like, did you mean to put XYZ in the book? And then they say yes, and then you know. But there's things you can kind of tell about a creator by what they create. And so I think that's true of Anne, and I think that's really cool and really interesting to have this decades long kind of record. I love her descriptions of things. Her writing could be so beautiful. There were definitely times where I missed something that she said because I was so distracted by how she said it. How she said it was so beautiful that I kind of had to like go back and reread and be like, wait, what actually happened though? And how experimental it was, starting with Interview, which takes place in the modern day of, then, the 1970s. And it's Louis and Daniel in a room, in an apartment on Divisadero Street, in San Francisco, talking. It's all dialogue between the two in present day as, Daniel is asking questions and Louis is answering them about, his story, or at least the version of it he wanted to tell. But that's an interpretation that comes in later because, again, that first book, Louis and Daniel in a room in the 70s talking in what was then, modern day. And then the second book comes out and it's first person, takes you through like, the framing being modern day of the 1980s, with the whole, most of the book being in the past in like first person. I think it's first person. No, it's not first person present. Anyway, I do have 3 of the books here with me in case I need to drop quotes from them. So I've got Interview, I've got The Vampire Lestat, and then I've got Memnoch the Devil. So, experimental. Oh yes, okay. Where Lestat calls into question or outright refutes some of the things that Louis claimed, either because there were things that Louis didn't know, or calling into question Louis's motives for the original claim. But even in that book, like, other characters kind of take their turns telling versions of their story. Armand, for example, gets a section. I think Marius gets basically a chapter. A lot of time spent on Marius explaining things, which wouldn't be so annoying. The Vampire Lestat's my favorite book. But Marius is one of my least favorite characters. And I try to be all, there's no, trying to rate them by how good or bad they are. It's all shades of gray. They're all monsters. They all do terrible things. Yes, I 100% believe that. And Marius can go die in a ditch. 100%. I'm really excited to see him be brought to life, especially since it's going to be Christopher Heyerdahl, I hope I pronounced that right, portraying him in upcoming seasons of the show, because I know him primarily as Alistair from season 4 of Supernatural. He was one of like the top torturers of hell. He's the one who tormented Dean for 30 years. Always giving him their choice that like his torment will end the moment he decides to take up a straight razor himself on someone else, and just the whole there's lots of bad guys out there that are bad guys, and I know they're bad guys, but there's very few villains, on-screen villains, that actually make my skin crawl. and he is one of them. The other one would be Kilgrave from Jessica Jones, but I think those are like the top two. But something about his performance as Alistair is legitimately chilling. He does so much with the limited screen time that he has, and I'm super excited to see him play Marius. That was a great casting announcement for me. Anyway, yes, he gets a turn telling some of his story in the Vampire Lestat, and then we have the Vampire Armand, and so just seeing different versions of the same event through different eyes, and so learning things like one character knows, different character knows. Queen of the Damned, which is the third book, has a ton of different viewpoints that it's tracking all the way through, from Lestat to, goodness, there's just so many. I think Marius is his own section again. We've got brand new characters that show up in that book with their perspectives. Of course, my favorite chapter is the Devil's Minion chapter, showing the story of Daniel Malloy and Armand. But I just love that experimental nature of it, and the fact that she was willing to, if there was something that she said or put into the lore that she ended up not agreeing with later on, or thinking could be changed or improved, or just needed to be different in some way, she went back and did that. I mean, she didn't go back and change earlier books, but she would change the canon in whatever book she was writing. And again, I don't always like some of the choices that she made. I think she could have had a great separate sci-fi series with, the aliens and Atlantis and all that. But she had the right to do it, and she did, and I think that's really cool. So, like, I feel like I covered those pretty well. What I covered briefly that I really wanted to talk about in this video that was just really hard for me to fully get down on paper. I finally got most of the quotes out that I thought that I might want. Is going over the themes. Because of course I picked 3 themes, not that the others aren't important or that the other themes I talked about wouldn't be involved in some way. I talked about 3, or want to talk about 3, that kind of heavy and a lot, especially if I want to explain something with context for those who maybe haven't read as far in the books or aren't as familiar with the books in general. How can I talk about characters' resilience without addressing the things that they've had to be resilient through? It's the Vampire Chronicles, and I think all the characters pretty much have some difficult backstory, some more than others. Like, we never really know about Claudia's backstory, except that we know that, like, where she was found, it was very run down, very, like, poor section of the city. Her mother was already dead, basically as you see it in the movie version, because the movie version, like, actually takes place in a time period. The book does, very faithful adaptation in that regard. But then some characters have been through a lot, including 2 of my favorites across all adaptations that I have seen so far. I have not yet seen Queen of the Damned. That is coming up. I want to do kind of like a, not exactly a watch along, but I have something cool in mind for that one. Okay, I haven't actually said who my two favorite characters are. Lestat and Armand. Those guys have been through things. At which point I should probably just give a trigger warning for all of the things. I know it's not really helpful. So, various harms of children, and I feel like that, I guess, generally covers it. I guess. And I should have done trigger warnings in a horror and hope punk video. I want to go back and figure out how to do that retroactively. And so I think in the state that I was, and then like the other one I want to talk, like the other themes I want to talk about were good and evil. That's a big recurring thing in the books as well. And then forgiveness, which I think is such an interesting theme in a series about all of these monsters who are monstrous to themselves, to each other. Of course, they're not exactly on great terms with humans as vampires. And so to have that theme come up. And so I want to try to address that, to address those themes in an unscripted way. I want to talk about those three themes and just characters, and did a great job creating these complex characters that have these contradictory qualities to them, where again, they're not really good, they're not really bad, they're as capable of being harmed as they are of harming someone else. And for all that everything is sort of heightened and dramatic because it's gothic horror, it's, you know, monsters and some degree of magic, there's some very relatable flaws. And yeah, so, and do I think she was perfect at it? No. There's, again, like I said, like I try to be all, oh, there's no really good or bad, they're all monsters. There's three characters in particular, and as far as I'm concerned, they're just bad. And I'm trying to decide which thing I should say. There's so many options. They can just go step on a Lego, to put it very mildly. And that would be Marius, Magnus, and Rashomandis. Those are my three that, like, no, I could probably find sympathy and empathy for just about everybody else. Even characters that some people who, I don't know, they call themselves fans, who am I to tell them they're not, like to bag on, like Lestat and Armand in particular. Louis gets it from certain sections of the fandom. I mean, everybody does to an extent, but those three. Yeah, again, like my favorites across all versions of the story are Lestat and Armand. Not that I don't have other favorites as well. Well, Claudia also amongst all adaptations. Really, just everyone that they've hired to play her has been amazing with what they were given. Absolutely amazing. Anyway. Themes and characters, and maybe it won't be quite as nicely sectioned out is what's originally going to be. I'm going to put my glasses on now in case I decide to pull quotes from a book. Resilience. So in a very general sense, resilience is a theme really starting from the first book on like a broad general level. It gets established that basically not all vampires can handle the reality of living forever, and at a certain point they decide that they can't keep going on. Trigger warning retroactively for suicide. So that happens, and that really plays into the selection of who becomes a vampire, or at least theoretically it should, according to the old laws. It should, where vampires are generally supposed to try to be careful about who they choose, that this person that they choose to become a vampire is actually going to be able to like handle it mentally, emotionally. They are going to be able to stomach living forever as a vampire and everything that that entails, and that there's rules in place that vampires are expected to follow about who does and doesn't get turned. One of the big ones being not turning children, and that only like the Coven Master can like ultimately decide and be the one to turn a new vampire. Everyone, I think everyone, even if you haven't really seen the movie, read the book, anything, generally knows that Claudia was a child. In the book, she was only 5 when she became a vampire, and that was considered way too young. Interesting to note on that is that in book canon, Armand was only 17, and Marius even like tells Lestat in this one that he regrets turning Armand when he was so young, which is a lot from Marius. Because it's Marius, and if you know, you know. If you don't, you're gonna maybe find out at some point. Now that he's actually coming to the screen the first time, sometime this summer. Or in this video, because we might get there. Yes, and it's part of his warning to Lestat. He is going over like what the rules for vampires are supposed to be. Again, like regarding who gets turned and who doesn't. And he talks about the one about not turning children, and he says he himself regrets turning Armand when he was so young, as a warning, like a personal warning. Like, here's like the lesson, the rule, but like here I am telling you some personal experience. Regretting turning someone who was just 17. And of course, we know Lestat then goes on to turn Claudia, who was even younger, but under very different circumstances and for different reasons. And it's not a lesson very well heeded, as he will himself admit. So from the first book, resilience is a theme. It's also something that's been present in the show since season 1. And an example that I found really interesting about that is, I know the episode title is Like Angels Put in Hell by God, which is, like I said in an earlier video, a direct quote from the book. All of the episode titles for the first 2 seasons are taken from Interview with a Vampire. And I kind of went through and I had fun like highlighting like all of the direct quotes that I found. Like here's one, and it's the, why do you do it, Lestat? Because I enjoy it. But in the episode Like Angels Put in Hell by God, which I think is episode 6, Lestat is telling the Cliff Notes version, let's be honest, about how he became a vampire to Louis and Claudia, and that the show went there so early on with his story and actually like expanded upon it from the original novel, which is harrowing enough. I was like kind of like shocked. Oh no, it's gonna be even worse. He says of himself, because he was horrified by what he had become, the idea of having to drink blood, and he says, but I have a capacity for enduring, which, what a line. And if I have not said that same thing to myself a few times, I absolutely have. Later in the episode, Claudia tells Louis, I'm enduring, and then, Louis, as he's narrating to Daniel, says, and so I endured my way back home. And so in the span of one episode, all 3 of the unholy family use enduring, to describe themselves or what they're doing, how they're moving through their lives at that point. And I just think that's really interesting, all 3 of them using the same word in the same episode. That's a really cool moment. So, speaking of Lestat himself, of those 3, again, we don't know too much about Claudia's history, and it really doesn't impact her in the book. It doesn't really impact her. Because in the book, she doesn't even, remember it. And it's just... Claudia's honestly, the best vampire across all of them. The most, pure, concentrated idea of, what a vampire should be. It's her. And so I can't really talk about her very much. Maybe I will more with the show version. And book Louis, I'm trying to say a little bit more with the books right now. Book Louis is a character that I have a little bit of a hard time with. Given his background, which I always ask me, where do you draw a line here? But not anyway. Focusing on Lestat and then talking about Armand, and just the things that Lestat has had to go through in his life. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, a recurring phrase with him, which is a line from Shakespeare. I touched on a little bit actually in my horror and hope punk video. I kind of gave a broad overview of some of the things that he went through. he grew up very poor, like living in a crumbling ruin. Of course, that ruin was also a castle, and his family was officially aristocracy, even if they didn't have the money to actually like live that way. And so that's like a weird dynamic where like they outrank everybody else in town, but practically everybody else in town has more money than they do. And so it's just weird, and I think it makes him a challenge for some fanfic authors to write. But that's besides the point. The whole thing, I mean, he even talked about in episode 1? I don't know, wow, episode 1, oh my god. About how he was like at a monastery and wanted to be a priest. He was actually 12 when that happened. He wanted to join up. It's interesting because he says specifically like he didn't even believe in God, but he loved living at the monastery and being around the priests, and this idea like they were like teaching him, right? And he wanted to be surrounded by all of the books and the library and kind of have a bit more of a structured life, and a life with like purpose where he could accomplish something, and how nice it was to be with people. I think he says he believed I could be good if I wanted to be. That's too far. I can't take too long going through this, but okay, that's the wolves. Yeah, it says I have highlights because a lot of people in fandom like to say like Lestat's stupid, or Lestat doesn't like to read. He actually does, and so I went through the book and I like highlighted all the instances where it talks about him, especially if he's talking about reading, but just like learning in general. Because I am that person. I took screenshots and posted them on Tumblr. But he says, and this is page 31. When I was corrected, which wasn't often, I knew an intense happiness because someone for the first time in my life was trying to make me into a good person, one who could learn things. Within a month, I declared my vocation. I wanted to enter the order. I wanted to spend my life in those immaculate cloisters in the library writing on parchment and learning to read the ancient books. I wanted to be enclosed forever with people who believed I could be good if I wanted to be. I was liked there, and that was the most unusual thing. I didn't make other people there unhappy or angry. And so everything he talked about, like how he was dragged back and he was beaten, that's canon. He was actually dragged back home. Another time he ran away with a troupe, like a theater troupe, like a traveling theater troupe. But like his brothers found him and dragged him back. He was 16. At that point, he talks about how he pretty much lived outside, and that he, with the help of his mother, selling some of her like family jewelry to like pay for, you know, the rifle, the horse. I think he talks about that in the first episode too. But he pretty much lived outside, and the family ate almost exclusively what he brought to the table. And he says, actually, in one of the first pages here, that there were times that the family would have outright starved if he hadn't been able to hunt food for them. And again, like they had land that they could have made productive again, and I don't really understand why they never did. Lestat wanted to have that done, and his family wouldn't go for it. Anyway, never learning to read, couldn't write much more than his own name, even though mother, Gabrielle, loved to read. She read all the time. She would lock herself away in her room to read as much as possible, but never taught Lestat. And Lestat, as we can tell, actually really likes to read, and reads a variety of different things in different languages. This is after he becomes a vampire, and he kind of learns how to read and write through osmosis, through like mimicry of humans, which is weird and cool. But like, he was fascinated by books, but also resented that like Gabrielle was so absorbed in them that she wasn't really attentive to, you know, her kid. And the fact that she never taught him how to read, even though it was clearly so important to her to read. So that's maybe all I'm going to say about Lestat and Gabrielle, because it's very complicated, and it does get I think, no, that's all I'm going to say. So I'm going to go there. And then we get to the wolves. Super cold winter. The wolves are leaving the woods, coming into town, scaring people. Maybe killed some of them. I don't quite remember. And so Lestat, as the son of the local lord, and the only one who knew how to ride a horse, and of course he has his hunting background, gets tasked with killing the wolves to protect the townsfolk. Kind of his responsibility as local aristocracy. And so he goes out to do that, but there's more wolves than he was warned about. I think he was warned that there were 5, and there turned out to be 8. And so he is fighting for his life. He unfortunately, warning for animal death. It's a really tough scene for me to read every time. He loses his 2 mastiffs that he raised from puppyhood, and his mare. And but he does succeed in killing all the wolves. Yay, he survives. Great, except that ends up being what puts him on Magnus's radar when he gets to Paris. This idea that he was a ferocious enough fighter, determined enough, that he was able to bring down all 8 wolves. And then wears the red cloak that you see in show in season 2, is from the books. It's the wolf killer cloak. It is lined with the fur of the wolves that he kills. So he's walking around wearing their fur of the wolves that he killed. And again, going back to that idea that vampires choose humans who they think are going to be able to mentally, emotionally endure like becoming a vampire and adapting to that life, and kind of vicious enough, Magnus picks Lestat because of the wolves. He calls him wolf killer. Also for Lestat's appearance, which is already awkward enough in the book, and then I feel like in the show they're especially given like the updated time setting to season 2, I mean the whole thing is updated, right, to starting in like 1910, and then season 2 being in the 40s, talking about Magnus these blondes over here, those blondes over here. I feel like they might be taking the uncomfortableness from the book and making it a bit more overt. I can't say that they are for certain, but there's a vibe. There's an uncomfortable vibe in the book with Magnus and his fascination with specifically blonde, blue-eyed, athletic men. I kind of wonder if they're gonna, especially given, anyway. But he is abducted by Magnus in the middle of the night. Magnus breaks into their room that he shares with Nikki, uses the mind gift to keep Nikki asleep while he abducts him. It's very graphic, uncomfortable. Turns him into a vampire against his will, so he survives that. And it's just all of these things that he goes through, and not that he never has a meltdown about it, never freaks out, never crashes out. Crashing out is something that Lestat's very good at. But he still ultimately, once all of the dramatics are over, he does still find a way to keep going. He refuses to be bad at whatever part he's assigned to play. And so that's part of how he approaches being a vampire. He didn't want to be a vampire, but now he is. And so he's going to be good at being a vampire. But he's also just has this inner strength that never quite goes away. It dims, but it always comes back. A lot is made of his inner light. I'm trying to find the right quotes. Why do I feel like it's actually this way? I know it's a conversation with Nikki. No, it's still this way. Here it is. Yeah. Argument between Lestat and Nikki. It's kind of like their last big confrontation before Lestat leaves Paris. Nikki stays in Paris at the theater. The vampires with Armand could possibly end badly for anybody, especially Nikki. This is 266. I didn't answer. I wanted him to go on. And when we decided to go to Paris, I thought we would starve in Paris, that we would go down and down and down. It was what I wanted, rather than what they wanted, that I, the favored son, should rise for them. I thought we would go down. We were supposed to go down. Oh, Nikki, I whispered. But you didn't go down, Lestat. he said, his eyebrows rising. The hunger, the cold, none of it stopped you. You were a triumph. The rage thickened his voice again. You didn't drink yourself to death in the gutter. You turned everything upside down, and for every aspect of our proposed damnation, you found exuberance, and there was no end to your enthusiasm and the passion coming out of you. And the light, always the light. A little bit later, same page, he says, like a mindless beam of sunlight, you routed the bats of the old coven, he whispered. And for what purpose? What does it mean, the murdering monster who is filled with light? And this sort of never-ending passion, this ability to like make lemons out of lemonade, lemonade out of lemons, is something that he often feels like drives people away from him, that he's just too much, too bright, too overpowering, like standing too close to the sun. But it is something that I have found to be very inspiring about Lestat, and it's how he's able to keep going. He always bounces back, and that's something that I know Anne from interviews. I don't know how to find the specific one, but that's something that inspired her. She liked about Lestat as well. And then Armand, who, such a good quote. I've got to find it. I think it's page 315, because I had to find it for the essay I'll eventually finish writing. Yes, page 315 at the bottom, crossing over to page 316. I gave an audible sigh of relief, yet his tone was so changed, so strong, that it sounded a deep, silent alarm in me. This was a coven master, surely, this quiet and forceful one, the one who would survive, no matter how the orphan in him wept. I love that quote. And again, talking about characters and their complexity and ability to be more than one thing. Here in Armand, you have, the coven master and the orphan. This is after Armand has used the mind gift to show Lestat and Gabrielle an abridged version of his story, because he has been through it. Like, there's a section in this book where he uses the mind gift to tell his story, but one moment. As I previously mentioned, he gets a whole book later on that is, similar in length to, to the Vampire Lestat. Vampire Lestat is 550 pages, or at least my version is. Vampire Armand is 457. Okay. Whole book talk about all the horrible things that he's been through. Like with Lestat, you have Man and Monster, which he talks about actually, even when he's still human, and he came back from killing the wolves. This idea that he was not himself when he came back, that he had changed. It wasn't really Lestat who came back. And then in Armand, we have the Coven Master and the Orphan. And he has been through, I want to address things specifically, but I also don't want to potentially make people uncomfortable, but then also people can stop watching, skip ahead. Don't really know where the line is on that one. But what he has said and alluded to in season 2 of Interview with a Vampire is more or less canon from the books. There's a couple differences, one of which in book canon, again, Armand's 17 as opposed to, do we have a canon age for Armand in the series? I don't know that we do. 20s. I think going by the actor's age. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, either way, Armand is much younger in the books. He is frozen physically at 17, no matter how much he continues to grow up mentally, emotionally. And then the other big change is his general background, which is that in the books, his original name was Andre, and he's from Russian Kiev, which I believe is like modern Kiev, Ukraine. So he's, as opposed to the show where he seems to be from Delhi, as far as we have learned so far, and what he is able to remember. So that was changed to accommodate, his actor, obviously not. His words. I had about 3 sentences, at least 2, just crash, train wreck in my head. Assad Zaman is English with South Asian heritage, and so Armand's backstory was changed for that, which I think is really cool. And then there's one accusation in the show against Marius, something that Armand, the way that Armand, again, sentences colliding, the way that Armand said Marius paid for some paintings in the show is not something that Marius did in the books, which Marius is an absolute creep. There's something really interesting. I'm so curious to see in this climate with the files that have not been released in full yet, even though they were supposed to be a month ago or more now. In this day and age, how they go about portraying Marius. Now that we actually get to see him, it's gonna be interesting. One thing that I can say for Marius in the books is, as much of a creep as he was in the books, he didn't do that. Although there is a scene in the book, because I was going through it for the essay, where I think they got that idea from, and I'm not going to go into it totally here, but it's after Marius has really confirmed his status as a vampire to Armand, which Armand has always known that Marius wasn't human, was something else, had these different abilities, but now Marius is open about the fact that he is a vampire, and there's this scene with some Florentines, because this is like Renaissance Venice, that like the Marius section takes place in, where thinking that scene is where they got that idea for the show and decided to just take what does happen in that scene, which is already uncomfortable enough, and decided to then like expand it and play into it and make it into the allegation that Armand makes in season 2. So he survives that. He survives, the Children of Darkness, and Armand survives in a different way to Lestat. He does have a rebellious streak that you see multiple times in the Vampire Armand, but like his primary way of coping is through adaptation, is through becoming whatever is going to make the person who currently decides his fate happy. He's never been able to be himself, to figure out who that is, to make his own choices, to develop his own sense of right and wrong. That is something that's really big with Armand, is that I don't know if I could say that he is truly amoral, because he does have some like religious or spiritual convictions from when he was a kid that make it, like, even though he has a lot of dissociative amnesia in the book, which seems to be carried over to the show, when he like he says, like his first memory is from when he was 15. So before that, he can't remember anything. Seems like they're carrying over that dissociative amnesia. He still has, like, the way that he grew up when he was like really little, before he ended up in Venice. It was very minimalist, to say the least. And I think part of that was just the general conditions of the area at the time, but also I think this sort of idea of like asceticism, I think I pronounced that right, and holiness, the idea of like depriving yourself, not having the much in the way of pleasures in order to be like more holy or more sanctified. And that makes it really difficult for him when he does get to Venice, because Venice is just so hedonistic comparatively, so luxurious, and it was hard for him to kind of adapt and adjust. And I think he still kind of has some of that through the rest of the book into what counts as modern day. So I don't know, like I said, he's functionally like completely amoral, but I think it is fair to say that a lot of his moral code comes from whoever has control of him at the time. And he's never really been able to fully develop his own, because he was a really young child. In this one context, then is kidnapped, ends up in Venice, eventually ends up with Marius, who wants him to live a completely different way than he's used to, and he has to adjust to that. And then he ends up with the Children of Darkness, again, have a very different way of living that they want him to comply to and conform to. And he does, at least on paper, outwardly. It's eventually revealed that he doesn't believe anything from the Children of Darkness, that like their beliefs about like serving God through Satan. He doesn't even believe in Satan. He's never, but it was something, even though he didn't believe in any of it, he clung to those ideas because they gave him like a way of understanding the world, interacting with the world, that he didn't have after he was kidnapped, and in the process, Marius was seemingly killed. So after losing his life and the life that he had in Venice, he needed something new to replace it, and it became the beliefs of the children of darkness. Even though he didn't hold them for himself, it was still like all he had. And these two, we haven't gotten to good and evil yet. It's been like an hour. This is what happens when I don't have a script, guys. Maybe I won't even get there, and I'm just gonna kind of talk. I don't know. These characters really stand out to me in terms of their endurance itself and the ways that they cope with what they've been through. They, again, going back to that horror and hope punk, they don't fully apply in the sense that I don't know if they necessarily inspire me to make the world a better place. Like say Dean and Castiel do, or Buffy and Angel. But as far as the resilience goes, the idea of like in my own world, in my own life, to keep having hope. They do inspire me for that. And I just find them to be likable characters too, even I know some people don't. Because of some of the things that those characters have done. But Armand's story is someone who's never really gotten to know who he is and starts developing that sense later in life, to say the least. I mean, he's literally at this point already died and become a vampire centuries ago. So later in life, to say the least. Figuring himself out is a really interesting, compelling story to me. And I find some comfort in it, and with Lestat and how he sort of keeps going like the Energizer, but maybe more like a whack-a-mole, because you can hurt him, he just doesn't stay down. Lestat is a whack-a-mole. And the way that he tries to make everybody around him happy, and that he keeps seeing good in people, even when they don't necessarily see it in themselves. Nikki being an example. They have been through so much, and like a lot of the dialogue about like good and evil and forgiveness. I was going to use to talk about those sections are from Lestat and Armand, and their strange, complicated relationship throughout the books. The ways that they're foils for each other, learn from each other, lean on each other. It's one of my favorite relationships in the books. Obviously, like I love Louis and Lestat. I love Devil's Minion. And then Lestat and Armand is probably like my third. I also like Claudia and Madeline from the show. I mean, yeah, from the book too, but that's like different. And in the book, it's very much like surrogate mother-daughter as opposed to an actual like romantic relationship in the show. Anyway, yeah. So that's resilience covered, I think, kind of, and talking about Lestat and Armand as characters, and we didn't really get to good and evil, and we didn't really get to forgiveness. But we're already at just over an hour, and I want to get this out. I don't. Everything I've said here, I have said with the awareness that, like, I do intend to just post this. So I'm not really going to do much in the way of editing. I feel bad for my own like schedule set up through July, knowing that things are going to get a little bit strange over the summer because at some point, Vampire Lestat slash season 3 is going to premiere. We don't have a specific date yet, just summer. The fact I'm really trying to make a go of this channel, Patreon, all of that, and yet I miss an episode so early. And just like the sense of, not this word again, responsibility. And why I say that is because of how many times it's come up in therapy. It's like you do a drinking game for, take a shot every time Alex uses the word responsibility in therapy. Don't. For the sake of your liver, don't. my relationship with the concept of responsibility is something that's being addressed. Anyway, but I have a sense of that in the general sense of wanting to develop people who are actually like here and following along. I've got to be consistent on my end, but then also specifically for the people that I know who do watch and pay attention and were encouraging me to have grace for myself, which I've really been trying to do. Does not come naturally to me. Really wanted to get something out for you guys, even if it's not perfect and polished and orderly. And here's all these neat sections that, that I've carefully written out in advance. Just, as a way of not just honoring my schedule that I made and my commitment to not just the specific project of analyzing, recapping the Vampire Chronicles, but like the overall project of like my channel, but like also just for the people who I know are supporting me. You guys mean a lot. To put myself out there like this, big deal that I've been too scared to do for a long time. A long time I've been thinking about doing this, and was always too afraid to do it. Felt like I would just be talking into a void. and so know that there are people who, are at least liking when I post something, who are commenting. It really means a lot. Um, and I'm really grateful. And yeah, I just wanted to give you guys something, even if it's not polished, which I do believe that authenticity is really important in a world where so much can be faked and made up. So like if I hop on without makeup and I'm, in my pajamas, or, it's late on a Saturday night and I'm just being honest about how I'm struggling, or like this whole video, which is not scripted and kind of meandering in a mess probably, but yeah, so just thank you guys. Really means a lot, and I will see you guys this weekend, if not before, with a book review. I'm an adult and Googling how to do a book review. Because I want it to be more than just, like elementary school sheet of this is the title, this is the main character, and want it to actually be like in-depth, meaningful, you know, adult comprehension level, not third grade or something. That will be this weekend. Again, thank you guys so much for following along, for caring, for being supportive of me and this project. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video. All the usual stuff that I'm supposed to say at the end. Yeah, I love you guys. Thank you guys so much. All right. Bye.